Story 1. Not my daughter, but my sister came home from college for Thanksgiving with a new boyfriend and his dog, an animal so skittish that it would not let anyone touch it other than the owner. When he called the dog, it would literally crawl on the floor towards him, obviously terrified that it was going to be beaten. Before the day was out, the dog had stolen a scrap of food, it was emaciated, and was promptly taken to the workshop garage, former farm, where you could hear the man beating the dog senseless. When he returned to where we were standing around the grill, my father calmly told him to get in his car and leave or he'd be spending the night in jail. The dog was taken to the vet, and presumably the shelter after that, and I had to drive my sister home. Personally, I think my father should have called the police and had him arrested. Story 2. One of my sisters dated men so old that I pissed her off bad once by saying, "Shit, sissy, you start dating any older, you'll have to hit up the cemetery to find a man." 99% of the time, she loved my off-color, fucked-up jokes, but that boyfriend was literally 70 years old. Our dad was about 55. She was 27 to 28 or so at the time. I remember that because it was just before she died. Yesterday was the anniversary of her passing. Mother's Day is always incredibly hard for Mama and my niece, and I made the youngest of my sisters actually crack a smile yesterday at the graveyard when I commented, "Hey, you know what? She's surrounded by potential dates now." I bet she's really happy with that, or really pissed at me for bringing up the best joke ever on the anniversary. R.I.P. Sissy, I miss you. Hope you still appreciate most of my fucked up jokes. Story 3. My daughter dated a guy, then broke up with him, but remained on good terms. A month later, she had a party at our house and he showed me a photo on his phone of his new, underage, girlfriend blowing him. Informed my daughter. They're not on good terms anymore. Story 4. In high school, I was someone's dad's least favorite boyfriend. My girlfriend had very strict parents who didn't allow her to date, so we had to sneak around them to see each other. Her parents used to leave the house on Saturdays for a long time to run errands, so we would hang out at her place most weekends. One Saturday we were in bed and we heard the front door open and her dad come home. I was up like a shot and got my clothes on, then hid behind the door. Her dad came in to say hi to her, and stood in the doorway making small talk for over 20 minutes, with me holding my breath only 3 feet from where he stood. When he finally left to go to his room, I snuck out and bolted for the door. And that's when I realized I was fucked. My shoes weren't where I left them. In fact, they were nowhere to be found. I was terrified of her father, and it was a nice day out, so I did the only reasonable thing and I just got out of there. Walked the full hour home barefoot. She told me at school on Monday that he had seen my shoes as soon as he came home, and had hidden them before coming to check on her. Sneaky bastard knew I was there the whole time but didn't say anything. She was in so much trouble that we had to stop seeing each other after that. Story 5. I know my dad would say my sister's current boyfriend. He ran from the cops for weeks after failing a drug test. He had been caught selling drugs in a school zone years ago. He ended up hiding out in my parents' house without them knowing, and then the cops came to their house and arrested him. My parents were furious and said he couldn't come over again until he apologized. Well, he is too chicken shit to apologize to them, so he hasn't come over in a year. She is still with this asshole too. Story 6. Can brothers chime in? I'm going to. Back in high school, my sister had a younger BF who I can best describe as a douche nozzle. I remember once, he was being his usual asshole self, annoying my sister who was hanging out with me and my GF in my room. She kept asking him to leave her alone and go home, but of course he wouldn't. I spoke up and said, "Dude, she doesn't want you here, it's our house, go home." He takes this as a personal challenge and stands up and gets in my face, yelling at me and trying to start a fight. I don't remember everything either of us said, but I do remember him telling me to hit him. I imagine it's because he was too much of a bitch to start a fight with me in my house, but figured he could fight back. I just told him to shut up and go get your ass in the fucking car. My dad drove him home, and he tattled on me by telling my dad I cussed at him. My dad said he told him, good. When you're asked to leave, leave. I'm happy he stood up for his sister. And I'm sure my dad had some other words for him. They didn't date for much longer afterwards. Story 7. My dad would say it was the one who got drunk and drove with me in the car, resulting in an accident that left me with a compound fracture to my arm. Mainly because after the accident, I called my dad crying hysterically because the dude had pushed me down and stepped on my broken arm that wasn't in a cast yet. Dad came to the rescue and basically choke-slammed the guy. My dad is my hero. My daughter actually married and had a kid with this guy who had already done 2 stretches for assault with a deadly weapon. His next violent crime will be his 3rd strike. She has defended him by saying that he never hurt her or the baby and that he was bipolar and couldn't help it. Either way, he's back in prison for 4 years after pleading guilty to a felony making criminal threats of bodily harm to her. She's promised to divorce him while he's gone. Story 8. I'm not a dad, but my older sister dated a lot of losers. The worst was Gilbert. Once he blocked my path and asked for a kiss when I was only 11. He kept insisting he was going to be family. Then he got drunk and took a swing at my dad. My dad is about 5 feet 7 inches and Gilbert was about 6 feet tall. Luckily my dad dodged it, and kicked him out. My brothers paid him a visit that night and Gilbert never returned to our house. Story 9. My stepsister was a serial dater in high school. Seriously, every month or so, there'd be a new boyfriend. Dad got tired of becoming emotionally attached to each new guy before the breakup, so he started calling them all Jimmy. They could have their own name if they lasted 2 months, or if he hung around enough to make Dad actually like them. One guy's name was actually Jimmy, so Dad called him Tacklebox, due to the excessive amount of facial and ear piercings the guy had. We kept track of who was who by adding hyphens to the front of them. There was Army Jimmy, who my sister dumped because he was becoming verbally abusive and talked about how she was lucky he didn't hit girls. NASCAR Jimmy, who was dismissive of my sister's interests, talked down to her, and apparently just kept her around because she was pretty and he could keep pressuring her for sex. A Jimmy who I can't remember their hyphen, but I know he and my sister got in a shouting argument in our driveway, and he drove off in a huff, never to be seen again. A couple other Jimmys whose faces I remember, but didn't stuck out in any particular way. A couple of them I think showed up at the house once, but never again. Tacklebox aka actually named Jimmy was the sweetest of them. Dad, who hates facial piercings, admitted he was the favorite so far because he was very nice. When he visited he'd help clean up after dinner, and when they'd take walks around the backyard, my sister would come back with a wildflower in her hair and really happy smiles. They broke up because he was going off to college and they didn't want a long-distance relationship, sad face. An knew Jimmy, who we couldn't decide on a nickname for, who eventually got his real name, ended up marrying my sister because he's a cool dude and they legit fell in love. I'm happy for her. And her new self-esteem. Story 10. I had a 16-year-old stepdaughter meet a 27-year-old drug dealer at a party. She immediately moved into his trap house. Being 16, the cops could do fuck all. She OD'd on fentanyl and was sent to hospital. It was there that I found out his true age and address. I left, went directly to his place and banged on the door not knowing who, or how many, were going to answer. When he did, I told him to get her belongings and that next time I wasn't coming alone. I went back to hospital and dropped her bag onto her lap. She promised to come back home and return to school. She left on a Monday morning to go to school, but never returned home for another 8 months. Only after I contacted his mother and let her know what was going on. She was told that my SD was 19. He was told to go back to his mother's place in another city and my SD came back home, for 2 months. She met another clown and immediately got pregnant at 18. Apart from the daddy issues, he's a non-existent drunk, being molested as a child by her brother, and abandonment issues. I did everything I could do to save that beautiful, special girl. Had her seeing doctors, counselors and a psychiatrist. She eventually refused treatment and now I never see her. Story 11. My older sister dated a crazy asshole in high school. She dumped him for being a crazy asshole and he spray-painted "slut" on her car and smashed all her windows. What a guy. Story 12. How about my sister, whose husband was caught on a hidden camera I helped install screaming obscenities at his own 1-year-old daughter, shoving his 5-year-old stepson and generally coddling his own 2-year-old son. What did my sister do with this info? Delete it so the step-kid's real dad could never know and then ignore the whole thing. What happened after I told my family that I couldn't sit by and let this happen? I was going to let the stepson's dad know his child is being abused, so they made sure I never see the guy and can't find his phone number anywhere. Any ideas? Edit. I was hoping to avoid calling CPS as that often leads to foster homes and way worse situations than what's happening here. But, it might have to happen. Story 13. My almost 40-year-old cousin has type, sketchy dudes who are addicted to drugs and work in kitchens. It's weird because she hates drugs and even at parties would kick people out for doing them. She's like a sister to me. I've never seen her get into a relationship with someone who she won't eventually freak out on because he's smoking weed or addicted to pills. The best part is she likes to listen to cheesy romance songs like Chasing Cars or Teenage Dream, and I wonder where in her head does Brett the dishwasher who loves Percocet fit into those fantasies. Story 14. I dated a guy for 5 years before he broke up with me because he didn't love me anymore. We decided to give it another shot a couple of weeks later, but whenever he would come over, my dad would go to his and my mom's room and shut the door so he wouldn't have to see/talk to my boyfriend. About a month later, we broke up again. For me, it was for good, but my ex wanted to try again just like the time before. After I ignored all of his attempts at communicating, he came by the house. My dad came to my room to ask what the fuck he was doing here. I told my dad that I was ignoring him and that he would go away eventually. My dad just smiled and walked out of my room. I look out my bedroom window and see my dad storming across the front yard waving his arms and screaming at my ex who had just gotten out of his car. I'm not sure what all was said, but that was the last time I saw/heard from my ex. My mom later gave me the rundown of what my dad had screamed at my ex about. Basically, my dad had told him that if he couldn't treat me like the most important thing on earth, then he could fuck off. Story 15. Not a dad, but my sister's boyfriend, went on to become her first husband, was a real treat. They'd been friends since they were 12, started dating when they were 20, and then he enlisted in the army. He was all around a pretty nice guy, and most of the family really liked him. He comes back from his first deployment and is a completely different person. He's more violent, paranoid, overly protective, and it became too much for my sister to handle and they got divorced. He definitely upped the creep factor when he kept stalking her while they were separate. She almost had to file a restraining order. All worked out in the end though. She remarried, has 2 kids, and is really happy now. Story 16. This happened to one of my aunts when she was a teenager, and my grandfather was the father in questions. This happened in the early mid-60s and my aunt's boyfriend was a bit of a Jack the Lad type, and as the story went, he slapped my aunt over something minor. My grandfather never swore, never raised his voice and had a Mr. Rogers-esque personality. Getting him riled up was very difficult, and until his death this was the only time my mom, any of my aunts or my grandmother heard him yell. He ran over to the boy, who was stupid enough to hit someone in plain view, grabbed him by the ear and marched him to the door while yelling, "How dare you raise a hand to a woman, sir? I ought to have you horse-whipped." He then threw him out the door where the boy fell on his arse. That was the last time my aunt saw that boy, and no one ever heard Granddad yell. Story 17. Stepfather here, and I came into her life when she was 20. Didn't like one of them, he was a cokehead. The other one, who was actually older than me, and older than her father by 2 years, used to talk down to her in front of us. He once called her stupid sotto voce in front of me, and I was about to deck him, but my wife talked me down. They broke up, and about 4 months later she met the man that is now her husband of almost 10 years and father to 2 of my granddaughters, and we adore him. Story 18. My aunt is currently having to deal with the fallout from her now deceased boyfriend. He was a hoarder. He verbally abused her for years, and after dating for 30 years left her with a house full of junk, $50,000 in debt to the state, and he quit paying his life insurance a year before he passed. He had been in very bad health for years. He makes me mad 'cause my aunt stayed with him, even though she wanted kids and he didn't. She could have had a relationship with someone else that would have cared for her. Story 19. Years ago I was home for college. My little sister was a high school senior and had a date with a new boy. Evidently he had recently dropped out of high school. He came in to get her and he chatted with Mom a few minutes. I walked in the room and chatted with him. Instantly did not like him. I don't remember why. He wanted to shake my hand. I refused, walked into the kitchen. My sister stormed in wanting to know what that was all about. I told her I did not trust him and didn't think she should go out with him. She went anyway. They drove in his pickup with no seat belts. Strike 1. Our dad had been recently killed in an accident. She asked him what the refrigerator was for in the back of the truck. He was taking it to wherever he lived. He had just stolen it from a new development nearby. Strike 2. Sister thought about it and asked him to take her home. He refused. Strike 3. At the next stop sign, she opened the door, said goodbye, and got out. She walked to a gas station and called me to come get her. He drove away and later is chased by the police, don't remember why, on the interstate in Charlotte, North Carolina, speeding, trying to lose the cops while the refrigerator rolled around in the back of the truck. He went off the road, hit a tree and was killed. Story 20. Not my daughter's father, but I am the one who got to know all of her friends and boyfriends. Worst past boyfriends are a toss-up between the one who took her virginity and basically used her for sex, and the one who beat her and who I still think is a pedophile. He was in his 30s, she was a teenager. Yes, I could have either called the cops or asked her brothers to pay him a visit, both of which I considered, but she wised up and got of there before I needed to take action. Current boyfriend, though. Tattooed biker dude, won't marry her, got her pregnant twice. He's also 12 years older than her. If she had ever let me pick her boyfriends, I would have looked at this one once and noped out of there. Now, after 4 years together, I can't imagine anyone better for her, or a better dad for my grandchildren. I love him, I love his family. He is gentle, kind, generous, soft-spoken. Seriously, the scariest thing about him is his appearance. He doesn't drink or do drugs, other than a little cannabis. The whole family are free-spirited hippie types, so my daughter fits right in, and they're going to raise those beautiful kids right. Story 21. Not a father, but the boyfriend. I, 16 at the time, hooked up with his daughter, also 16, at an overnight Halloween party where there weren't supposed to be guys. Needless to say, there were. Did it the laundry room, was weird but fun, and yes, used protection. Anyways, we decide to start dating, but neither of us wants to deal with family drama. Her family is strict AF and mine are just weird, so we keep it on the down low. Just hang out at school and meet up after without letting it slip. Well, sometimes later her father figures out what happened at the Halloween party, and that we've had an ongoing sexual relationship for a while now. She tells me he wants to meet me and I'm like, fuck no. No offense to her, but the whole avoid each other's families thing was working great. Once dear old dad hears this, he apparently gets violent and tells her that I can come to him or he can come to me. She tells me this at school and I'm just like, oh fuck. Next thing I know, this asshole is showing up at my home and yelling at my parents that I raped his daughter. Literally outside of my house when I drove home from school. Since I handle confrontation poorly, I turned off my phone and drove away. Got something to eat, cruised through Walmart, went to the movies, and then drove home. My parents are chill, they didn't worry about me, knew I'd be back. They tell me this guy wants me brought up on charges for sexually assaulting his daughter and victimizing her over the course of the couple of months we were together. I lay out the truth for them and yada yada. We decide to just see where this goes because at the time we figured it was a hollow threat. Nope. Next day in school I'm called up to the office where the school officer is waiting with the principal and say that the father actually filed a police report. Then they had a chat with the daughter who explained that her father was lying, and now they're chatting with me because they want the whole story. Everything gets said and they send me away. After that everything just sort of vanishes. Guess the guy calmed down and buggered off. Aftermath is we stopping seeing each other. Which sucked because I really liked her. And when other people found out, I received a few odd looks in the hallway. Years later, in college, we got in contact through Facebook and she told me her dad still despised me and often used my name in arguments over her dating habits. So I was probably the worst boyfriend his daughter ever had. Story 22. From an opposite perspective, I recently broke up with my girlfriend of 3 years because her father was so terrible. She had been planning to move in with me for 2 years, but he always stopped it from happening. After her first attempt to move in, he refused to talk to me or acknowledge me anymore. Now that she graduated from college, he made her move back in with him and break up with me. And it's not just her. He's done this to her brothers too. She's 22 and her brother's 25 and 27. They're all single because their dad can't stand them having someone more important than him in their lives. Dude seriously got narcissistic personality disorder. Any of the dads here care to explain or defend his position? Story 23. After reading some of these, I feel much better. One of my daughters went through a period of live-in boyfriends who were kind of boorish assholes, but IRC, none of them were ever arrested or laid a hand on her.